So I'd like to start off this video with a couple of disclaimers. First of all, the subject I am going to be talking about today is intended not for you to take as gospel or for granted, but instead to open up the board for discussion with other people who are willing to discuss their opinions, their thoughts, and also listen to opposing viewpoints of that exact same situation. The second disclaimer is I am going to be pretty much addressing the more vocal fans, the fans where you will actually see their presence on social media, you will see them making comments or maybe even directly addressing players, coaches, and teams after whether a win or a loss, just some kind of interaction where it's very visible to the public to actually see that kind of interaction. So with that being said, what we're going to be talking about today is Reddit's recent involvement in social media, not just Reddit, but really just the overarching internet, and how they've been reacting to a lot of different heavy and hard losses that have been coming to a lot of teams during the Season 7 World Championship for League of Legends. So, of course, a lot of things come to mind. I'm sure for many who are watching this video, considering this is for a Western audience, the first team that comes to mind when I bring up expectations and not living up to them is TSM's failure to make it out of groups at Worlds. There was a lot of hype coming up for this team once again, and they did not manage to make it out of Worlds. They did manage to get to the tiebreaker for the second seed of the groups, but even then that was supposedly a failure to even have to get that far to try and get out of groups. And you could see, especially after the loss to the Misfits in the final game of the group stage, there was a lot of hatred, a lot of vitriol, and really just most analysis of the post game immediately after the game was not the kind of constructed criticism that teams or people can really take away from. There was a lot of memes, a lot of hatred from both sides, and really it was not conducive to good conversation and good discussion. And that was just one of many examples. Of course, plenty of others. I tapped the mic there, my bad. There was, of course, the Game 4 Misfits throw that when they went for the tower dive was maybe a good play, maybe not, but it managed to turn the game around in momentum in favor of SKT. They managed to win the series in the end. SKT is now moving on to the semifinals. As I'm making this video now, they're going to be playing RNG tonight to determine who's going to be making it to the finals. Of course, some more examples, maybe Fnatic's inability to adapt, even though they were starting to look better and better as they got that momentum. And on the flip side, Immortals' failure to close out games, like with the Cody Sun famous flash that's now going to be remembered by a lot of people. EDG choking at Worlds, Cloud9's Game 5 draft. There's just so many examples we can get from this one tournament alone that fans will immediately jump to one specific instance, one specific event, or just one point in that entire series of events, and they will point at that as the reason this team lost and this team won. And so what I kind of want to examine through this video is really taking a step back and kind of looking at the bigger picture for why these games go down the way they do, and really just to kind of encourage some more thoughtful discussion for hopefully the rest of this world and into the future, and realizing that first of all, the simplest factor that seems to be forgotten by a lot of people, because even though this is pro play, this is supposedly the highest level of competition you will find in this game, one team must always lose. There are no draws. There will always be one winner, one loser. And so, of course, for a team to lose, they will have to make mistakes. No team will play perfectly. And if a team does somehow manage to play everything perfectly, they cannot lose. So for all of that to really come about, to really factor all of that into the discussion, you need to really take a step back, and that's really a flaw of why I'm targeting Reddit specifically, because it is a flaw of Reddit, especially with the post-game discussion threads that I know that many of us, I do as well, participate in regularly. The reason that these post-game discussion threads are inherently flawed for good discussion on a game is because they come out the second the game has been decided. The second the Nexus explodes is that post-game thread is already posted onto the forum for everyone to discuss. And even though it's joked about plenty, People love to get the first word in edgewise, so they're going to immediately have all these comments written up. They might not even be paying attention to the game because they're still trying to figure out what they want to say after the game is done, whether it be memes, whether it be serious discussion, whether it be analytical, whether it just be a joke. No matter what, the things that usually get put into those threads first are the things that are going to get upvoted to the top. Those are the things that are going to continue to get upvoted because they're the first exposure to newer people coming into the threads later on. And that's an inherent flaw of these discussion threads, because whatever manages to gain momentum very, very early on into the process is the one that is going to continue to rise up to the top and get more upvotes. And really, it just kind of brings about the whole Reddit hive mind that gets brought up, and it makes it harder for opposing viewpoints to really discuss and break down what happens in the game. And so that's something to keep in mind as well when you go into these Reddit discussion threads. Even the serious threads that come out the next day, sometimes they're just not the greatest way to go about really discussing the game, breaking down what happened. And also a flaw of that is the way the messaging kind of works. It's kind of delayed. You can't necessarily put a lot more information, and it's not really a discussion in the most puristic sense, because you're having to wait for replies and people really have to think about their answers instead of having a direct one-on-one discussion with someone right away, where it's really whatever comes to mind first is what is replied with. Instead, you kind of have this back and forth where it almost feels like, in the effort for upvotes and the effort for recognition, people try to one-up each other instead of actually listen to what the other person is saying. And of course, that applies to much more than League. That applies to much more than Reddit. It is inherently one of our human flaws to really try and look better in comparison to other people's, especially when it comes to our personal opinions. But it's something that needs to be kept in mind when you try to discuss these games. So getting back into the specifics once again, I want to talk a little bit more about the whole losing-winning aspect of this competition. There is never going to be a draw in League of Legends, no matter how much people can try, no matter how evenly matched teams can be. Eventually, one team will come out on top. And that can come from a million different reasons. That number itself may be too small, in fact. And we can just look at this last week's upvoted threads and this last week's upvoted videos for examples. You look right now, as I am making this video, Reaper's video where he analyzes the entire series that they have versus World Elite, and you can see him go step by step. This is a head coach for a pro team, not just a pro team. This is one of the best, if not the best, North American pro team. Here discussing the head coach about the draft, and all the things he's saying are now, you can see people in the comments agreeing with what he's saying now that it's being laid out. But you go back into the past, you go right when it's fresh in everyone's minds, when Cloud9 barely loses that 5-game series against World Elite, and you see people completely hammering the draft, not knowing the full context. And that's the issue with going for these knee-jerk reactions when you make comments. Not knowing the full context, of course. It's very, very hard. Sometimes it's even impossible to get the full context of a situation. And of course, everyone has the right to have their own opinions on these topics, whether or not they actually have the full context. But the problem comes in to where they take those emotions that they get from those initial comments and they manage to push it into personal affairs. They manage to push for people to get fired. They manage to push for, this person is better than this person should get off the team, we should get this guy instead. That's when it becomes a problem. Because only with enough context can you make those kinds of decisions and those kinds of conclusions when talking about this high-level play. So if you look at a single breakdown video by Zyrene or Jat, you look at them put in slow motion, look at milliseconds at a time, the gameplay, breaking down every single decision that is made during that team fight, and you can see just how much goes into just a single second to the live viewer. For the people making those breakdowns, for Reaper, who has to go over his draft over and over again, who has been practicing for weeks, months, to really break down this situation, excuse me, and when you look at Marks yelling every other week on the blame game about mid-priority, about draft, about this and that, really, you look at all these things, these are people who are spending hours or days or weeks or months analyzing the game, breaking everything down, trying to consider every single possible situation, and even then, they will have differing opinions on the exact same clip. And that's where the issue comes in. If there can be differing opinions, if there can be people who thought this might have been optimal, this pick might have been better, you should have gone with this band, you should have gone with this formation, you should have sent this guy bottom lane, then that's why this degree of randomness, the volatility of this game, and the human element that is included whenever you're going to have a competition, there's always that human element to be considered, unless you're Faker, of course. And that is why having knee-jerk reactions and using it as gospel because it sounds good to you can become problematic in the long term. And it's just something to consider moving forward. I hope to see that more discussion for these semifinals going into the finals of the World Championship. We can see a little bit less knee-jerk reactions, one-sentence memes. They should have banned Galio. They should have picked Kog'Maw. Why did they pick this? Why did they ban that? Instead, kind of go in-depth. Ask other people for questions. I guarantee you, if you make a comment in one of those post-discussion threads, and at the very end, just ask, what are other people's thoughts on this? You will get tons of replies. Everyone is willing to give their own opinion. The problem is being willing to have other opinions given back to you and to take them into consideration going into the future. So with that being said, that's enough ranting on that specific element of this video. One more thing that I want to talk about before I'm actually ending this video is my personal experience. I did have a knee-jerk reaction myself after watching TSM lose the final game against Misfits. I am a North American. I am actually an American. And I am not a TSM fan by any means. But I was, of course, still disappointed because for most people, their initial reaction is to cheer for whatever team, whatever nation, whatever anything feels to represent you as a person, feels to represent your identity. So of course, being an American, I was hoping TSM would win. So I did immediately think, well, why would you do this? Why would you do that? Why didn't Bjergsen, in my specific case, why didn't Bjergsen roam down? That was the really big thing that I was kind of emotionally charged about, was why wasn't Bjergsen roaming down? But it's very, very difficult to get the full context on something like that. Why wasn't he roaming down when we only get to see his perspective of the game for percentages of the game, for fractions of the game? Since we do not have the capabilities right now to spectate our own pro games from our perspective and move the camera as we please, we are victims and prisoners to whatever the cameraman is looking at the time. So it might be that Bjergsen was being pressured in a way. There might have been jungler pressure, there might have been a lack of vision, something that does not allow him to roam down. It might not just be him ceding lane pressure, but for my initial knee-jerk reaction, all I saw were the results. So that is something that, of course, I am admitting as well. I am not trying to play the high ground here. I also fully admit that I, as a passionate League fan, do admit to sometimes having knee-jerk reactions. But it's best to kind of go into the future without that kind of mindset, to always kind of think about some of the other factors that might be at play. And one last thing is, I have actually been in the scene. Again, I kind of use that term loosely, hence the quotations, kind of following the pro scene, the amateur scene, stuff like that. I have worked in the past with a challenger team, not directly, but have worked and spoken to coaches and analysts who have been on challenger teams, none of which have actually been successful past the open qualifier. I have casted for multiple amateur leagues over the last couple years. I've watched all different kinds of degrees of tiers of skill level, from bronze all the way to masters tier players playing in these amateur tournaments, whether it be for fun or for prizes. And it's just, the more you play this game, the more you interact with other people, the more you talk to other people about this game, the more you realize there's just so much we can continue to learn about it if you're willing to listen. And with that note, I am going to be ending this video now. For those of you who stuck to the end and listened to what I had to say, I really appreciate it. And all I ask is that you share this to other people who you would like to be exposed to this kind of discussion, and I also ask that if you send them this video, to ask them what they think, not just about the video, but about Worlds, about League in general, about video games, and just listen. And you might find that your own opinion, your own perspective has changed, and you might find that you're actually genuinely enjoying the game more because of it. So thank you for watching.